What looks like an ordinary bird swimming about is revealed to be our hero James Bond 007 on a clandestine mission of sabotage. While the second Bond film, From Russia with Love, featured an engaging pre-credits sting where Soviet super assassin Robert Shaw took down a Bond look-alike, this is the first film in the series in which we are treated to a now staple of the Bond movies, the action set piece featuring Bond on a mission, unrelated to the ensuing plot, priming the audience for what is to come. And here, we get it all. Spycraft, action, explosions, an elaborate Ken Adams set improbably housed inside some industrial bin, a suave secret agent in a white dinner jacket, and a beautiful woman who falls into the embrace of everyone's favorite super spy. More action, and of course, some morbid humor to lighten the mood.
Shocking.
The opening is part adaptation of the Fleming novel, as Bond reminisces in the opening pages about his killing of a Mexican drug dealer. But mostly, it's new director Guy Hamilton's successful attempt to offer a tease, an icebreaker for the audience, encapsulating what they're in store for in this new film. All of the above and more if you'll come along for the ride in Goldfinger. Hamilton comes out guns blazing here, the opening sequence being one of the many great additions to the Bond repertoire. And he cited Henry Hathaway's World War II adventure film, The Desert Fox, The Story of Rommel, starring James Mason, and its opening as inspiration for his film. And you can really see where he's coming from. This is a great little sequence, unusual for films at that time, that really rockets the viewer into the movie as we watch British agents make a beach landing to take out the famed General Rommel. They fail in this task, but not after we are treated to an explosion of gun violence and sabotage. The Bond opening would of course become something all fans wait with excitement to see after that famous gun barrel goes askew. It would of course go on to be matched or topped in the preceding films, but Goldfinger deserves a lot of credit, and there are a lot of firsts in Goldfinger, a lot of moments or staples of the series that make their debut here with Hamilton at the helm, in this, the most widely successful Bond film to date. Goldfinger skyrocketed the series to international popularity. Aiding Hamilton in the task was a massive promotional push driven by tie-ins with Fleming's novel, luxury products like Rolex, and a big hit title track by Shirley Bassey. It's hard to contextualize as modern audiences just how truly exciting and different this movie would have been in late December of 1964, as we've become desensitized to some of its effects, charms, and innovations. For instance, this somewhat tired or cheesy moment with the bird reportedly got a big laugh. Martial arts were starting to make their way into mainstream American movies at the time, in films like John Frankenheimer's The Manchurian Candidate. But the art of judo, practiced so memorably by Harold Sakata and Honor Blackman, would have been a fairly new concept to many. Instant killing nerve gas would have been a novelty. And of course, we can't forget lasers. Well, that was big shit. This here would have been people's first encounter with the idea of plastic explosives. This was innovative stuff. This was real spycraft. And you could see it all for the cost of, $1? All springing forth from the fertile mind of a former spy, or somewhat adjacent spy himself, the estimable Ian Fleming, author of the Bond novels, who sadly passed away 4 months before the film's premiere. Fleming was an interesting guy. He basically palled around on the fringes of elite society in England in the early half of the 20th century. His preoccupation with athletics, various romantic affairs, and lackluster grades saw him bounced from school to school in his youth. He worked as a journalist for Reuters in the Soviet Union and had a short failed run at the family trade of banking before finding what seems to have been his purpose and true calling during World War II as an assistant to the Rear Admiral John Henry Godfrey in the Department of Naval Intelligence, wherein, according to Ben McIntyre's book, For Your Eyes Only, Ian Fleming and James Bond, his task was to dream up espionage plans with convincing scenarios, which Fleming interestingly referred to as his plots. Hardly any of these plots were ultimately used, but some are quite interesting. Printing and introducing fake currency to drive inflation in Germany, sinking a load of concrete with soldiers inside to monitor enemy sub-activity, and dressing up British commandos as drowning German pilots so that they might hop aboard a Nazi rescue boat, overpower its crew, and steal the elusive German Navy codebook. By the end of Fleming's run in the British Navy, he had ascended to the rank of lieutenant commander, the same rank as Bond, and it's interesting to the extent to which Fleming used his military career as well as personal friendships with unusual people he met during his travels as inspiration for his Bond novels. The plot of Goldfinger came from Fleming's meeting with a man from the British Treasury at a spa resort retreat, a resort which he would later use as inspiration for Bond's recuperative stay in Thunderball. The most interesting part of Goldfinger the book, in my opinion, is unfortunately translated into one of the more boring moments in the movie, the rundown of Goldfinger's scheming. In the novel, it's made clear to Bond that Goldfinger is laundering British gold out of the country in order to exchange it for a higher return rate than allowed by the Bank of England in foreign lands. It's kind of interesting and gives the reader the feeling that they are gaining some actionable knowledge of global politics while enjoying a pulp spy adventure. In the film, it's a rather rote scene between government agents at a dinner table where the takeaway is that, number one, Bond knows his booze, and that Goldfinger is stealing gold, which is less interesting, and the audience really can't wait to move on from this stuffy briefing and get back to the real movie. Another great moment in the book that is relatively well preserved for the film is the discovery of Goldfinger's card cheat scheme, which involves the beautiful Shirley Eaton spying on his opponent's hand from the balcony of a luxurious Miami hotel.
Now hear this, Goldfinger. Your luck has just changed. I doubt very much if the Miami Beach police would take kindly to what you're doing. Nod your head if you agree. Nod. Good. Now start losing, Goldfinger.
Everything about this moment is great. Bond getting the drop on his opponent with wit and charm. Even the comely young Eaton is impressed, taking a well-deserved break from the employ of a slug like Goldfinger to be pleasured assuredly by the masculine and cunning James Bond. Moments like these are relished as we, the audience, are in awe of Bond's abilities, and the women likewise reciprocate. Goldfinger, however lowly we find him in this scene, looking rather frumpy in his poolside attire, is nevertheless a Bond villain for the history books. His self-confidence, his effortless swagger in his big body, his well-fitting layered clothing, earth tones and gold. He's a unique Bond villain in that he seems to be having fun. He's a jolly old evil bastard, rich in mirth and appetite, and as much as I love Toby Stevens' BBC4 radio production of Goldfinger, in which Ian McKellen plays the role, Ian is much too regal. The voice and demeanor of Goldfinger must be both thunderous and gluttonous, a man who loves gold. And what is gold? Gold is a store of value, as economists might say. And Goldfinger is a walking testament to that, wearing the evidence of his great meals, draped in layers of fine clothing wherever he goes. And, gold is an interesting obsession for a villain because there's no real tangible way to interact with it, other than to touch it, feel it, admire it, acquire more of it. You can't even really spend it without going through an arduous process of conversion. I guess money, paper notes are sort of similar, but they don't have that same allure, the same ability to ensnare and possess you like gold. There's also a suggestion of impotence with the character of Goldfinger that makes him an ideal foe for a hero like Bond. Bond can make love to Shirley Eaton and engender her trust and appreciate certain aspects of her personality or other aspects that I will leave to your imagination. Goldfinger cannot do that. He can only admire her, possess her, and finally mock her in death by turning her into a crude approximation of his real love. Eaton's character of Tilly mentions in passing that her and Goldfinger don't have a physical relationship, but that he would like people to think that they do. He's vain. He's an average golfer, an average card player, and therefore he cheats. Appearance is everything to him, and I mean, for a big slovenly guy, Goldfinger does dress impeccably. He's swagged out. He looks awesome. Bond, however, is not ostentatious, simply by dint of his secret job. He doesn't need or desire credit or laurels. He's content to achieve and revel in the niceties of the job for its own sake. He doesn't need public validation. He's not boastful. He's just a competent professional. Gert Frobe, who played Goldfinger, despite exaggerating his ability to speak English, his accent was so thick and his grasp of English so poor he ended up having to be dubbed by actor Michael Collins in post-production, was nevertheless well-liked by the cast and crew, and was asked to return in another Saltzman and Broccoli production, the adaptation of Ian Fleming's children's story Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, as Baron Bombburst. If you take a look at Frobe's Wikipedia page, it features a wonderful picture of the actor at the premiere for the 1965 film Those Magnificent Men and Their Flying Machines. Look how happy he seems, idolized and celebrated by audiences after a full life, a life that put him on an improbable path to the big screen. Frobe was born in Germany in 1913 and was a member of the Nazi Party as a youth. He had a change of heart in 1937 and defected, hiding a Jewish family in the basement of his home until he was forcibly drafted into the war effort in 1944. Goldfinger was on the cusp of actually being banned in Israel as part of the country's policy of prohibiting work with former Nazi involvement, before the testimony of the Jewish family saved by Frobe in the press preserved both the actor's reputation and the theatrical run of the movie in the country, where it went on to be a big hit. Even though Frobe was dubbed, and the undubbed footage seems not to exist, it seems maybe not to matter. The performance of Frobe as Goldfinger is such a physical performance. The way he moves, looks, and takes up space on screen is the key to Goldfinger's longevity as one of the Bond villain greats.
Man has climbed Mount Everest, gone to the bottom of the ocean. He has fired rockets to the moon, split the atom, achieved miracles in every field of human endeavor, except crime.
And what of Bond in this film? I guess it goes without saying that Connery defined the character as one of the most masculine and effectual leading men in cinema history. So I won't beat that horse, but what did surprise me is the degree to which that Bond takes a back seat and the extent to which the plot takes over and sort of happens around him. Bond has some great moments in this film, of course. The golf sequence in which Bond is able to weaponize Goldfinger's vain cheating against him is excellent.
That's his original ball. I'm Arnold Palmer.
It isn't.
How do you know?
I'm standing on it. Well, let's have a little fun with Mr. Goldfinger.
It's always great to see Bond engage with his villains in games of wit or sport. It's like foreplay before the thunderous, action-packed physical conclusion. It's Bond confronting the villain with his wits. A thin veil of civility is cast across these matches, but they are always charged. Bond follows Goldfinger to Geneva, where he discovers he is smuggling gold in his massive car. Goldfinger is really into Koreans. His entire staff of goons is made up of Koreans in blue jumpsuits. And he's got the massive odd job, of course, played by Harold Sakata, who was actually a Hawaiian citizen of Japanese descent, who had great success as an Olympic weightlifter, winning the silver medal in 1948. And the Korean thing might seem inexplicable to audiences today, but in the book, Goldfinger, it is explained to Bond that he employs only Koreans because they are inherently violent or sadistic in nature or something that, by today's standards, would seem horribly outmoded. Goldfinger, in his arrogance, keeps Bond around when he should probably just kill him. Again, of course, the old trope, monologuing, etc., which basically renders Bond kind of an inconsequential character in the grand scheme of things. In the book, Goldfinger never discovers that Bond is a secret agent working for the British government. Instead, he coerces Bond into working for him, and his scheme to rob Fort Knox, changed in the film to the irradiation of the gold of Fort Knox to render it unusable and dangerous, thereby inflating the value of Goldfinger's own stores. This is a cool and welcome update to the harebrained scheme of literally stealing pallets of gold and putting them on a train, like in the book. But it does sort of render the idea of the mob bosses kind of useless, which is why they're killed for no reason. And making Bond a sort of perpetual prisoner for most of the second act is a unfortunate choice. It kind of robs him of the agency he had as a mole inside Goldfinger's operation, who was sabotaging him from the inside. And in the end, Bond is bailed out by the Americans and really the quick thinking of Felix Leiter. And Bond defeats Oddjob, yes, but he doesn't even really defuse the bomb. Some American scientist guy does. And so Bond is fairly irrelevant to the unfolding plot here, but he looks great being a part of it. He gets to pull all his signature moves, be witty, escape jail, roll in the hay with pussy galore, and kill Oddjob with his own hat. So overall, we leave feeling really good, despite the fact that America really did all the dirty work and Bond was just along for the ride, which does point to something fundamental about Bond, the fictional character, which I think is important to understand or entertain if we're going to contextualize Bond's place in, most importantly, British history and morale. It did always seem odd to me that Bond, the agent of the British Secret Service, should be at the center of so many era-defining global catastrophes in the 1960s. I'd always had the suspicion, tacitly endorsed by Fleming biographers and historical critics of the Bond series, that Bond was sort of a coping mechanism for British readers against the backdrop of their increasingly diminished standing in the world post-World War II. My friend and Twitter personality, Criminal Penguin, agreed and recommended to me a great book, The Man Who Saved Britain, a personal journey into the disturbing world of James Bond, written by historian Simon Winder. It critiques the Bond books from what I would say is a left perspective, fairly obviously, but it's a personal retrospective while also serving as a semi-historical analysis of the British psyche in the 50s and 60s, and the important and outsized role both the character of Bond and its author Fleming played in comforting and providing moral support to a demoralized public. According to Winder, the British public were both flummoxed and enraged by the seeming dissolution of England's empire after World War II. Over the course of 20 years, the English presided over the abdication of their colonial holdings in India, Myanmar, Nigeria, Cyprus, and Fleming's own adopted home of Jamaica. Many of these countries became independent, and according to Winder, the public neither understood nor saw how they could create for themselves a new identity without the empire. It generated bitterness and a loss of identity that found solace in, amongst other things, certain high-quality action books of the 50s. And while Fleming was never overtly political, it would be reasonable to assume that as an old-stock member of the British gentry, the minimization of Britain on the world stage would have been a shocking thing to live through, and that he reacted against it by creating his signature British hero. As Roger Moore says so memorably in The Spy Who Loved Me, "I'm keeping the British end up, sir," as in sticking up for England, pulling his weight. And as much as Bond is thought of as this, style icon, and the Bond films thought of as very mod, hip movies of their time, it's interesting to note that Bond himself proves to be a bit stuffy and behind the times, especially here with this line about everyone's favorite lads from Liverpool.
That's as bad as listening to the Beatles without earmuffs.
Winder notes that the character of Bond in the novels especially is much more a surrogate for the things that Ian Fleming does and likes, rather than a true bellwether for what was actually fashionable and high class at the time. In a wild little coincidence of fate, the actor Richard Vernon, who played the British Treasury Secretary in the briefing scene, also has a memorable small role in another popular British picture of the time, the Beatles film Hard Day's Night, in which he plays an ordinary businessman on a train, at his wit's end with the boys' antics. He says something fairly striking and gets an equally telling retort.
And don't take that tone with me, young man. I fought the war for your sort. I bet you saw you won.
Is there any doubt that this hapless character, this man on the train, and Fleming would have seen eye to eye? That these rambunctious, careless, impudent youths running amok were more obviously less a driver of the times than products of it. They missed the heyday of the empire, and instead want nothing to do with it. Is it any wonder Bond and Fleming would opt for earmuffs?